The reason why there's silence and I don't speak, one way of putting it is, the reason why I don't speak for a while is because I don't know what to say. Potentially, that could be a very uncomfortable state. If I don't know what to say and I'm looking for something to say, it becomes uncomfortable. When I don't know what to say, and think I should know, that's uncomfortable. I don't know what to say and feel bad about not knowing what to say. It's very stressful. But to be comfortable with not knowing is a state of creativity and depth. And then you have access to a deep knowing. And that's not just the case with a spiritual teacher, it applies to you. You're also a teacher. To become comfortable with not knowing. Then by itself, a deeper knowing arises out of that, when the not knowing is not resisted. You surrender into the state of not knowing. And it is the most beautiful state of deep inner connectedness. Then whatever needs to be known at this moment truly needs to be known, not satisfy mental curiosity or whatever. What truly needs to be known or done is known right now when it needs to be known. And there's a lot that does not need to be known. But what is truly needed is always there, out of that state, in which you seem to disappear as an existing entity that's I know. And then you realize that all thought knowledge, all knowledge that's derived from thought is kind of pseudo-knowledge. Because in thought, when you call it something, you think you know. When you have a label for something, you think that's what it is. Not realizing that every label is an abstraction. It's not it. The state of not knowing, of course, is also the state, as we talked about yesterday, when you walk around or sit and perceive without interpretation, without labeling. And again, that's the state of not knowing, and yet of a deep knowing that is beyond mind. So as the awareness, the unconditioned consciousness arises, separative knowledge which is of the mind, because every label separates you from that which you label. It becomes a barrier. That separative knowledge is replaced by a unitive, one could say, knowing, which does not separate you from that which is known. And you can see how that transforms your relationship with nature and how it transforms your relationship with other human beings. Because so far, 90% or more of human interaction has been through separative, attaching labels onto people, interpreting, judging, not realizing that every interpretation and every judgment is no more than a very limited perspective. One standpoint, one small perspective, no more. Once you know that, you no longer get deceived by the mind, and you believe that one perspective contains the truth, that one thought that you express could ever contain the truth. It is a small perspective, no more. It is a fragment, no more. So the recognition of the relativity of all thought. And we are moving towards a different kind of knowing. In which the sense of separateness does not arise. That knowing is also loving. It's one. Because love is obscured through the delusion of separateness. Love, as the realization of your oneness with all that is obscured by the labeling, interpreting, the knowing mind. Then whatever you look upon in that state of not knowing from the point of view of mind is looked upon with love, compassion. They are all aspects of that state of deep knowing that to the mind looks like not knowing at all. And you can imagine how that changes human relationships. When you can be with another human being in the state of not knowing, which either means you're totally present, totally still, allowing this form, the form that this moment takes, the form of this human being, to be completely. Or it could mean that certain thoughts still arise about that human being, who they are, that they should be doing this, should not be doing that, should know better, they are this, they are that. But thought is recognized as thought. You don't believe in it totally anymore. And you recognize it's a fragment, it's only a thought. And you allow it to pass, and then you re-enter the state of not knowing. You don't get tricked anymore by the mind. And so there is continuously that dimension of aware presence that may be all there is, or it may be the undercurrent, and on the surface of it there are mind movements. That's fine. Sense perceptions, also, all sense perceptions are surface phenomena. Ultimately, in themselves, not all that satisfying. They're never satisfying for long. Nothing here in the world of form satisfies for long. Even if it's beautiful initially, you can come to an exotic place like this, because for many people who've traveled here, this is very exotic. It's not exotic if you live here, and it's not exotic if you spend a few weeks here. Then the exotic is no longer exotic. It's just, it's no longer satisfying. For a little while, it's the new forms satisfy, and then that's not enough. I need some new experience, some new forms. You may already have reached the point where it isn't satisfying, because it never is. You might have had a mental projection, an ashram in India, me in an ashram in India, that would add something to the story of me and make it much more interesting. And then whenever you encounter the reality, very soon when the novelty wears off, which could be after a day, it's not all that satisfying, the world of form. There's always something, that wasn't supposed to be there. The art that was supposed to be, and that wasn't supposed to be there. And the spider in my bed, or whatever. Or worse. Sooner or later, and usually sooner, you hit upon that the unsatisfactory nature, if all that you know is that. And the unsatisfactory nature of your own mind. And with its knowledge. So neither the external world of form and experiences is ever enough, nor is your own mind with its accumulated knowledge ever enough. So life becomes frustrating, a continuous search. In many people, it manifests as a continuous, almost continuous desire to be somewhere else. When you were at home, you wanted to be in the ashram. Now you're in the ashram, you want to be home. Does that sound familiar? You may have counted the days to your trip to India, and now you're counting the days to your departure. So that seeking through form, either the external forms or through mental forms, it's never satisfying. And so the search continues. You could try another ashram, or maybe a retreat center in California would be so much more comfortable. Or you say, I'm done with spiritual things. If that's spiritual, I don't want it. And so I very rarely use or refer to old pointers or maps, signposts. But what very much applies here, there's a very powerful signpost. One of the Upanishads, ancient scriptures, they contain some very powerful signposts. And I'll just, this is very relevant to what we've just been looking at. I'll just quote to you the first few lines, approximately. What it refers to is nothing that you see or hear or think is it. Nothing in the world of form is it, is satisfying ultimately. If you look for satisfaction through that, which is ultimately yourself, because the only ultimate and true and satisfaction you can ever find is finding and being totally yourself. That's the true satisfaction that everybody is looking for, through this or through that. So the Upanishad says, this Upanishad says, not that which the eye sees, but that whereby the eye can see. Know that alone to be Brahman, the eternal, and not what people here adore. Not that which the ear hears, but that whereby the ear can hear. Know that alone to be Brahman, the eternal, and not what people here adore. Not that which the mind thinks, but that whereby the mind can think. Know that alone to be Brahman, the eternal, and not what people here adore. It gives a few more examples, but it all points to it. It's not in the form, not that which people here adore. It could even be the idea of God. Think about it. And again, that is not it. That which makes all perception possible, that which makes thought possible, that is the eternal. And where is that? Already here, as the essence, as the now. That's what it is. The eternal that never leaves you. The now. You are one with it. So the ultimate secret about now is that you are that. You are the now. Of course you are. It's the only thing that has never left you. always was the same. It's always been no. And people have that sense of something very precious, and they think that gets mixed up in their mind with their story, and they call it their individuality, their individual sense of individual existence. I don't want to lose that. There's something so precious that I feel inside me. I don't want to lose that. That gets mixed up with identifications, mental identifications with stories, and that story-based sense of self. But if you look deeply at your innermost sense of I, your innermost sense of who you are, then you realize it has nothing to do with the story of me. You could forget your story, you could forget your name, and in fact, it would be there. You would sense that innermost sense of I-ness more strongly as the essence of your being. And this is why sometimes people find it, when everything collapses in their lives, their sense of identity had become mixed up with all kinds of identifications, mental identifications, that suddenly, through great loss or death, things collapse in their lives. The structures, the forms collapse, external and internal. External as physical structures, the seeming solidity of my life crumbles. Internal, belief structures, the whole story of me falls to pieces. And then it can happen that innermost I is suddenly can shine, because it had been covered up by multiple layers of identifications. And suddenly when they break, then you realize what was shining through. The only thing that gave life to the story of me, the only thing that illuminated it, was the innermost I. And you mistook the formations, physical and mental formations, for I, because the light of I was shining through those structures, but you didn't know the essence of that light. You only knew it was shining through these forms. And suddenly the forms collapse, and what is there then in its fullness and purity is the innermost sense of I or I am. No longer this or that, simply beingness, presence, unconditioned, is suddenly there. It's all fallen away. And so people in the midst of great disaster in their lives suddenly stood there and said, this is incredible. Where does this peace come from? Enormous peace. They didn't understand it. The peace that is beyond understanding. And of course, this is why suddenly all that was obscuring, the forms that were obscuring that innermost I gave way. And it can happen in the case of death. We pointed it out yesterday. A person slowly dying. Everything melting. And it can happen as the result of being in the presence of presence, in a spiritual gathering, the energy field of presence. That also is being drawn out. The unconditioned is shining through the conditioned, and the conditioned is becoming more and more, loses its density even as you sit here, becomes more and more transparent, in a way, dies, one could say. The conditioned I, in the sense in which people usually use the word I, the most frequently used word in the English language, or any language, the word I, the way in which people usually use the word I, what they refer to is me and my story, the conditioned entity, ultimately the fiction that I identify with as me is I. That's what people, when they say I, they refer to that. But there is a deeper meaning to I, that is the delusion of I. That's the delusion of self. But I is a sacred word, ultimately. I is, on the level of normal human consciousness, expresses delusion, which is what the Buddha recognized when he saw the delusion of self. He referred to that I, and he saw through that. And so, when that delusion is recognized, that recognition already originates from the unconditioned consciousness. The delusional entity cannot recognize its own delusion. So the recognition of it already is the light shining through from underneath, so to speak. From there arises the recognition of the delusion of the story-based, form-based, mind-based, identification-based identity. So, and this is what Jesus referred to when he said, before Abraham was, I am. Not before Abraham was, I was already. There is no was, no will be in I. It is eternal presence. Eternal nowness. And this is what the Upanishad refers to. It is the formless, the unconditioned. It is known, never in a subject-object relationship. It cannot be known in such a way. So one could say, it cannot be known at all. You can only be it. Realize that you are it, but cannot know it as you know an object in consciousness. So people have been for thousands of years trying to make God into an object in consciousness. The idea of God, the image of God, statements about an object in consciousness, and this is why the Upanishad says, not what people here adore, that is not God, not that which you see, not that which you hear, not that which you think, not that which you believe in, because it's thought. Belief is thought. You believe in God. That also is not what people here adore. It is a mental idol, ultimately. It is an ideology. You believe in God, and the person next to you believes in communism. Two ideologies. So it's not what people here adore, not that which the mind thinks, not that which the mind believes, but that which makes all thinking, all believing, all sense perception possible. The formless, out of which all forms arise. And that is the innermost I, the essence of what gets mixed up in your life with forms. And it flows, the self gets mixed up with forms, the deepest, the innermost self. And here, the blessing and the grace is it in this energy field. It is, one could almost say, being pulled out of you from underneath all the formations, all that. That in you responds because it recognizes itself in what seems to be the outside. And so that state of still alert presence emerges. In the absence of that, the only thing that could get you there is suffering and disaster. The breakdown of forms which had obscured the formless. And this is the grace of the spiritual teaching. It saves suffering. It saves a lot of time too. Because suffering implies time. Eventually you would get there through more suffering. But the suffering that you have had has been enough to get you here. Without it, you wouldn't have come. So it's worked. It's worked. Suffering works, no doubt. But it can take time before it really works. For a long time, suffering can lead to increasing egoic delusion, increasing contraction, increasing density. But a point is always reached when it becomes, when the auto-destruction happens, the density and the heaviness of it cannot sustain itself anymore and goes. It's like layers fallen off. And then sometimes those beings who realized that, they looked back on their suffering and said, what a nightmare. And then they talked about it and realized how strongly it resembles a dream. All the suffering that they have been through, now that they are awake, they say, what a nightmare that was. And so when they start teaching, they sometimes speak of the delusion of suffering, the unreality of it. From their position, from where they are, their realization, this is true. It may not be true when you are in the middle of it. Of course, you could make it into another belief. You go to a teacher and he says, all suffering is an illusion. And you say, okay, I believe that. And then you carry on suffering. And you say, it's an illusion. It's an illusion. But it's a pointer. Suffering is an illusion, is a pointer. And one day, the little pointer may hit something. The planet is heavy with pain, human pain, in the energy field of the planet. A long time of creating pain out of that egoic delusion. Each human creating pain for themselves. A painful form identity. Not knowing who you are is suffering. Not knowing who you are beyond form is suffering. And so they created a whole world out of that state of consciousness, and they created a lot of pain out of that primary delusion, because that delusion flows into whatever you do and think and experience, is colored, distorted by that delusion. And sooner or later it always turns into pain. So humans have been this in the collective energy field of the planet. There's an enormous heaviness, which is human pain. And every human carries part of that, in addition to the pain they've experienced in this form as children, residues of pain that people carry inside. Pain body, I call it, which is partly personal, so to speak. Ultimately, nothing is personal. It's nothing to do with who you are, but only in the sense that it comes from your childhood, your past, the past of this form, residues left by suffering that you have gone through in this form. And a large part of it is the collective energy field, the collective pain that is in the human unconscious, the heaviness of that. And that, when I began to teach, I pointed out, when I began to understand this inner transformation that had happened to this form, I began to see that it's intimately connected with surrendering. It's intimately connected with the surrendered state that is totally aligned with now. And I began to teach that. And as, of course, that is the ultimate, the root cause of suffering is the state of non-surrender, which humans have been in for thousands and thousands of years. So I began to teach that there's no need to suffer anymore. And gradually I saw that even those who were able to totally surrender to now still experienced wave movements of pain in their lives, even though they were surrendering. And then I began to learn about the human pain body as I observed that and realized that every human carries his or her share of collective human pain. That's ultimately what the pain body is. It is the manifestation of human unconsciousness, and humans carry it in here, in the body. It is an emotional, an energy field of that is not flowing, life energy that is stagnant, trapped, and manifests either as anger or as great fear or as the heaviness of depression, so it's It's an energy field of pain that humans carry. And sometimes they don't even know it's there. It's dormant at times. And life works beautifully. You surrender to now. And you might even think, that's it, I've come to the end of it. And then suddenly a little trigger happens. A little thing goes wrong, or even a little thought comes into your head that suddenly proliferates and becomes a trigger for an enormous influx of pain in whatever form: anger, fear, heaviness, of sadness. And suddenly you're completely overtaken by that. And it flows into your mind. It energizes all the mind structures of the ego. It energizes and amplifies the story, all the identifications. And so the me, the self, the mind-made self, becomes extremely empowered through that. The delusion becomes empowered through that pain, human pain. And you start thinking, all thoughts reflecting the energy field of the pain body. So the pain body has moved into your mind and is governing, controlling your thought processes, and actually feeding on each thought. You strengthen the pain body through those thought processes, because each thought corresponds to the energy vibrational frequency of the pain body. If it's anger, it will be thoughts of anger. And that's how the pain body renews itself. And so the pain body becomes a self. It becomes, you identify with it as self. You think it's me. It is you, really. It possesses you, so to speak. And it feeds on other people. If it could speak openly, it doesn't say that openly. It wants to make somebody unhappy. And it wants somebody else to make me even more unhappy. And usually it succeeds. Because one active pain body during its active period, once it's fed on your mind and other people's reactions, it will subside, go back to the dormant period, the dormancy. But during the active period, it will feed on your mind and on people around you, and it will easily awaken other people's pain bodies if their pain body is at a stage of readiness to come out of the dormant state. And so one pain body can easily awaken several pain bodies in its vicinity. You can notice it in families. It sometimes happens at work, in your workplace, anywhere where people gather. A committee meeting, one heavy pain body in a committee meeting can awaken every other pain body that has been dormant in that committee, and you get big drama. And so it's wonderful to watch how it works. Oh, and if you go outside, if your pain body is active, and it may be active for an hour, it may be active for a whole day in some people. It could be active for several days. It varies a lot. For some people it's only a few minutes. But those tend to be people who are already becoming more conscious, so it cannot linger. It's recognized sometimes before it can really get hold of your mind. We'll come to that. But if you go outside and your pain body is active, you also attract other active pain bodies, because active pain bodies recognize each other. So if you then, any situation that you walk into with an active pain body, or you may be hiding it at that moment, it'll be in your mind, yes, it's active, it's using your mind, but you're smiling. And suddenly, somebody attacks you, verbally or in whatever way. And that was somebody whose pain body recognized yours and said, oh, here's food. And then you go away from that, and then you go around the corner, and it happens again. Somebody else attacks you. And the whole world seems to be hostile, because every pain body, unless they are totally dormant in certain people, maybe they've just gone through the active period and they just don't want any more pain, they haven't digested the pain yet. But every other pain body recognizes you. And they like to meet each other and feed on each other. And for some people, the pain body is associated also with the opposite sex. That's a strange thing that is not that uncommon. And that is but often the case when, not necessarily always, you've had a painful relationship with a parent. Then your relationship with a man, your relationship with a woman is associated with pain body. And it is not uncommon for people to choose their partner through their pain body, unconsciously, of course. To choose, when you fall in love, quite often the pain body has a part in that. And this strong attraction you feel is partly the attraction through your pain body to somebody else's pain body who perfectly complements yours. And so you feel drawn to that person so very strongly. And we all know people, perhaps even ourselves, who again and again are drawn to the same kind of person that creates the same kind of pain for them. And they're doing it again. And then they say, this time I'm not choosing a partner with a pain body anymore. I want somebody conscious. And so you choose somebody who practices meditation, who is a vegetarian. And surely he or she must be conscious. And maybe you forgot that Hitler was a vegetarian too. And then you start living together, and then you realize, oh, suddenly it's happening again. The same, I've fallen into the same, I've married the same man again. That's because the attraction was there through the pain body. So many marriages are like that. Made in, what's the expression? Made in heaven, something, marriage made in heaven. And this one is made in hell. So pain bodies recognize each other. Pain bodies do not want to be recognized in themselves for what they are. They don't want the light of your attention on them. They want to flow into your mind, renew themselves through using your mind and using other people. They can only continue to renew themselves if you don't recognize them for what they are. If the recognition isn't there, each time you get overtaken totally. And immediately it's become self, it's become the me, an unhappy me. So to break that is simply to be alert enough, and of course you cannot make yourself be alert enough, that the alertness, the presence that is required to watch the pain body, you can't make, through effort, make yourself alert enough. It's either there or it isn't there. In your case, it's there because you're here. That is a clear sign that enough presence is there for you to meet the pain body with alertness and watch it. If possible, the moment it arises as an enormous energy impulse. And to watch that. Maybe you can't stop it yet. You don't need to stop it. Just watch as it, if possible, catch it before it becomes a thought. Catch it on the energetic level just as it begins to move into your mind. Now that is easier to do with certain pain bodies than with others. If your pain body's frequency is predominantly heavy, of enormous heaviness and density, so when it takes you over, you go slow and heavy thought processes about how dreadful everything is, just completely pointless and dreadful. And the whole world is just dreadful. Now those are easier to catch because they arise more slowly. It goes, oh, there it is. And then there are other pain bodies that contain a great deal of fire, anger, and they come, and that's very hard to catch them because there's virtually no gap. They arise as an energy phenomenon, but before you know it's an energy phenomenon, it's already become a thought and you're shouting at somebody. Or if nobody is around, you're shouting in your head. And so the pain body has already taken over your mind. And so the most difficult one to catch is if it's predominantly angry. And you may not be able to catch because the gap between seeing the pain body as an energy phenomenon and it becoming a thought and thereby a me, a self, the gap is too short or almost non-existent. In that case, all you can hope for is that in the middle of that, somewhere, an observing presence watches you in motion. Oh. And so from underneath the pain body, there is a witnessing presence. But it may not happen yet. It may be that you wait until it's subsided, and then, very quickly, the awareness is there, and you suddenly realized that was the pain body. There it was. It just been feeding on my mind and on this situation. And the more consciousness there is, the sooner you wake up after it has subsided. You can wake up as the anger subsides. There is sometimes a gap when the energy field goes down. The pain body begins to leave your mind, begins to withdraw because it's been feeding enough. It begins to withdraw from your mind. And there, at this point, when it begins to withdraw, you can sense it as an energy field. Okay, you haven't failed. You're there now. At any time you are there as the presence, it's fine. With now other pain bodies you can catch as they arise as an energy phenomenon. There it is. And you watch it, you allow it to be. This is the key. You allow it to be. You cannot fight it. The key is even here, to bring in the yes. Because it is. It is. What can you do? It's right here. It is. It is the suchness of this moment. And so, you embrace it. If that's all you can, that implies that there is a witnessing presence. So you embrace it, you allow it to be, and the amazing thing is when you begin to realize that there can be, even in the case of the pain body, there can be a spaciousness around it. Even in the case of an angry pain body, which fumes and shouts, and suddenly you know it, and allow that to be there, there's suddenly a little bit of space around it. Freedom arises when you see the non-personal nature of the pain body. When you see the non-personal nature of the emotional pain, ultimately, although anger doesn't recognize itself as pain, you see the non-personal nature of all those energy movements that we call pain body movements. They are recognized as human pain. They only become personal when they amplify and energize a story in my head that is my story, and that is me, and that is the fictitious self. That is the delusion that it is a personal matter. And you suddenly, when you allow the pain body to be there as an energy phenomenon, it's no longer a personal matter. And you realize it's very similar in every other person. It's basically the same. Anger is anger, human anger. Fear is fear, human fear. And sadness, the heaviness of depression, is the sadness and the heaviness of human sadness. There is no person there. And so it's an enormous liberation to see that this is not, it's not who I am, it's not me, it's human pain flowing through me. It's the human condition. And here it is. And what can you do with the human condition, which is the condition of the unsurrendered consciousness for 1,000,000 years? You bring surrender to that. The human pain body is only there because of 1,000,000 years of non-surrender, of egoic delusion. And so you simply bring surrender into that. And with that act of yes, its impersonal nature is revealed. And it's not feeding on your mind anymore, because it can only feed on your mind by pretending to be you. It's only when you believe, when it becomes a self, the pain body energizes the mind structures that we call the self, the mind-made self, amplifies those mind structures, then it's feeding. If the pain body does not flow into that, it cannot gain new energy. And the energy that is there, through allowing it, becomes dissipated. Not that you can't kill it, there's nothing there to kill. It's life energy, but it's trapped, that's all. It becomes the heaviness or the anger. Anger, all it means is enormous amount of life energy at a particular frequency trapped. And then you bring acceptance to it and presence. They are one. And suddenly, that transmutation could be described as the pain, the energy, the vibrational frequency that was in the pain becoming transmuted into the much higher vibrational frequency of presence. It becomes consumed and it becomes conscious presence. And this is why many people with extremely heavy pain bodies more people with heavy pain bodies have become liberated than people with relatively weak pain bodies. And that's why it's often in people where you would say, he hasn't got a chance, not in this lifetime. Look at his pain body, I mean, just... And you could be very wrong. So my pain body was extremely heavy, the pain body of this form. And it was only through it becoming unbearably heavy, that it dissolved all at once. And it became consciousness. For most people, the dissolving happens over a period of time. This does not mean that you cannot already be free of suffering, no, because when you no longer identify with pain body as a personal matter, as a me, as self, when you simply recognize it as an energy movement within yourself, you recognize that, you bring presence to it, you allow it to be, then it cannot renew itself. The transmutation has already started with that. You don't need to do anything as such to become free of pain body. No doing can do it. One could say to be free of pain body, the opposite of doing works. And the opposite of doing is allowing. But allowing implies that you are there as the witnessing presence. Because if you are not there as the witnessing presence, you cannot allow it. And the very essence of the pain body is that it doesn't allow anything. It is the essence of not allowing. So, no doing to become free. The key is allowing it to be there. And this applies on the inner realm to the pain body. It ultimately also applies to certain situations on an external level that you have been stuck in for a long time, or repeatedly. Situations, you always find yourself in a similar situation, and again, and you've tried to get out, new place, new country, new partner, and you're back in the same. In those cases also, no further doing can get you out of that. It is only through allowing this moment to be totally as it is, in other words, the surrendered state, that change will happen. And it will happen quickly through surrender. So there are certain situations where, of course, you need to take action to do something about it, to remedy a certain situation, but particularly situations where you find yourself in a stuckness and you find yourself experiencing the same and again, it calls for surrender. You can't run for the rest of your life, run away from something, run away from your partner and another partner, and then run away from that partner. Look. Or wherever you live, or whatever relationships you're engaged in. So both on the inner level, the inner realm, and the outer realm, they're one. The greatest power for transformation lies not in doing, but in allowing. And allowing then implies another perspective on this. It is the ability to look, I'm using it metaphorically, not necessarily with the eyes, to look at your pain body, to bring attention to it. You have to allow it before you can give it full attention. Giving full attention is allowing it. If you don't allow it, you cannot give full attention. So this is the power of presence. And you give attention similar. This is why we talked yesterday as a preliminary to this about the simple and relatively easy act of giving your full attention to a sense perception, a tree, a flower, people moving, giving pure attention, watching it, allowing it totally, no needing to interpret it. And now we bring attention to that. And that's the unconditioned consciousness. Vast intelligence is looking. Vast intelligence is at work. In Chinese terminology, the Tao is there, and you are totally aligned with it, and it's looking. That the one intelligence is there, and the looking is enough to initiate the transformation of that situation. The looking is enough. No analysis required through mind. How can I get rid of my pain body? How can I get rid of this problematic situation that I've been in for 15 years? And I've been thinking about it for 15 years. And I've been analyzing it, and I've tried this and I've tried that. But what you haven't tried is to look. Simply to look in that field of alert presence and allow it to be. And see what happens. But the looking, when I say see what happens, that could be misunderstood. There's no expectancy of some future result in the looking. There's simply the looking, the watching, the giving attention, the allowing it to be. And there's enormous power in that. Far greater intelligence is now released than is in the limited human mind, even the greatest human mind. And again, because everything is connected, we started our gathering today with pointing out the power of not knowing. And so when you look at something, you don't feel that you know. So this is another aspect. When you look even at the pain body, there's nothing much that you need to know about it. There's just the looking in the state of where no further knowing is necessary, and whatever is needed now comes. It can come in many forms. A sudden transformation from within the situation. As it can also come in the form of a sudden thought. And that thought is a realization. Oh, okay. A sudden insight. It can come as an external factor or event suddenly coming into a situation and changing it completely. It can come as a spontaneous impulse from within you and you do what is needed without any doubt whatsoever. The right action happens. So in many forms, the transformation can manifest itself, but the basis for it is not to bring the conditioned mind to it and try to solve it through the extremely limited knowledge, even in the greatest mind, limited knowledge of the conditioned mind. And what we call the greatest minds on the planet, those great people we put on pedestals, they are the greatest minds. They're not really the greatest minds. They had some access to that. They had some ability, perhaps only in their field of endeavor, to be in that state of pure attention, of pure looking. And that's where Einstein looked perhaps at a mathematical formula, which all these scribbles on the blackboard, which of course was mind stuff, but there were certain breakthroughs, there were insights that came to him that nobody could have worked out through the mind. He had the ability, and other great creative minds, as they are called, and to look. And he has made statements that are deeply mystical, so he had deep insights, he had access to that dimension. He even said once, I want to know the mind of God, the rest is details. In other words, I want to know God, the rest is details. In other words, he said, I want to know that which is beyond time and form. The rest is the world of form, details. So that power is your own power, the power of the universe in you. So look at your pain body in that way. And whatever you look upon in that way is embraced. It's all right. Look at the worst conflict situation. The world is full of dreadful conflict situation. And anyone that comes into your field of attention now, people in conflict, can't work it out. Look, give it full attention. Bring that alertness there. People discussing and arguing, and you sit there. And then suddenly, something happens. Suddenly, maybe they stop talking, or you say something, a decisive thing that nobody had thought of, and that changes everything. Anything could happen. You don't know beforehand how that intelligence deals with the situation, but it deals with the situation powerfully. Any person in turmoil who comes to you, this has happened, that has happened, and he did to me, and then he said, and I can't. Oh. Oh. And then see what happens. I've told this story before. When first time I realized, not long after the inner transformation, an extremely excited woman came to me with a very strong ego, talking about her drama. You must do something. You must help me. Come, talk to the lawyers. Do this. And for 15 or 20 minutes, I listened to that pain body, heavy pain body. And she, of course, as the pain body, wanted me to confirm the reality of the story, the reality of the situation, the reality of the problem. Please confirm that this is real. And so for 15 or 20 minutes, I gave her attention. There was just allowing that. And that was the first time. Subsequently, it happened many times when I realized that the power, the transformative power of that, when suddenly she stopped talking, looked at all the attorney's papers around her, hundreds of papers and lawsuits that she'd been involved in for years. And suddenly she looked at me and said, at all the papers, and said, "This isn't important at all, is it?" And I said, "No, it isn't." And then she just sat there for a few minutes and said, "All right, I'll go now. Thank you." And the next morning I saw her and she said, "What did you do to me last night? Last night was the first night in 20 years that I slept well. What did you do to me?" Her ego was back a little bit, and there was a suspicious look on her face. It's "You did something to me." And from then on, she believed that I had hidden powers. But if you believed that that power was your power, it would very quickly become obscured and blocked, to realize there's no me in that whatsoever. If you ever made a me out of it, and the ego could come back through any back door, the ego will come back in and claim some attainment. I healed that woman that night. It's possible the ego could come back, which means the portal is closing again. The openness is gone. The little egoic identity has come back and claimed some attainment. I did that. You did nothing. It happened because you were not there. It happened because you were transparent. You were open. You were an opening. That's why it happened, not because you were there, because you were not there. Beware of this little thing in the head, the little egoic entity, trying to, where's the back door, it says. I need to get back in somewhere. And it's happened even with spiritual teachers. Enormous power coming through them. And then at some point, there was the claim of specialness. I am the one. You are also the one, but not quite as one as me. So that's, of course, something to watch in oneself. Special claims of specialness. Because every ego, every egoic entity is special, very special. My problems are very special, much greater than yours. My knowledge, greater than yours. My misery, much more than yours. I'm much more ill than you. You have a headache? I've had a headache for years.